She called me sweetheart as she buzzed me in. Aunt Clarissa always used that word like a leash, tight, saccharine, and just short of public humiliation. The receptionist at the front desk looked up when she saw me, her eyes flickering over the badge in my hand. Visitor. It still said visitor, even after all this time. "Clarissa told us you were coming by," she said. "Boardroom's prepped. She asked if you'd like tea." I smiled. I already had something bitter this morning. She didn't get the line. That was fine. It wasn't for her. The boardroom was cold, polished, over-designed, the exact opposite of the servants' kitchen I'd grown up in, 23 yards behind this main building, with a broken stove and tile grout older than I was. I walked across the marble without noise. My heels didn't echo. I'd learned to move silently in this place. I knew where the cameras were. I knew the shape of Clarissa's voice when she was about to lie, and I knew, because I had asked for it, that someone had placed the old mop in the far corner of the boardroom, just behind the seat Clarissa liked to claim. I didn't look at it. Not yet. "My name is Celeste Rivas. I'm 32 years old, founder and CEO of Veridine Logistics, a tech-enabled supply chain firm valued at $210 million. But here today, I'm still just Lena's daughter, the girl who grew up cleaning the corners, the one they forgot, until they needed a partner with trucks, data, and control of 3 ports. Clarissa didn't recognize me when she walked in, or pretended not to. She wore the same perfume, floral, acidic, used the same tone she had when I was 10, and she told me to fetch water while the real family opened gifts. "Darling, you look so polished. What a delight to finally connect." Her eyes scanned my posture, my suit, the chair I'd chosen. She didn't expect me to be sitting there. I stood, buttoned my jacket, and extended a handshake. "Clarissa," I said, "let's begin." She blinked, her lips parted, a beat passed. "You look just like your mother," she said. I didn't reply. The intern brought in coffee, no sugar, just how Clarissa liked it. But I didn't touch mine. I let her sip, let her talk. She launched into numbers, potential, expansion, logistics nightmares they needed solved. I didn't interrupt. I listened. I always had. The fallout started small. Clarissa reached into her bag for her portfolio, then realized she'd left it in the car. She looked at me. I looked back. She asked, "Would you mind grabbing it?" "You're closer to the hall." That was her default setting, delegation disguised as charm. She had always spoken in commands shaped like questions. When I didn't move, she blinked. "Of course," she said. "You're not the help anymore, are you?" Not anymore. But I remembered when my mother was. I remembered Clarissa waving her hand toward dirty linens without a word. I remembered the Thanksgiving when she asked my mother to scrub the baseboards before she sat down to eat. That day, I was 12. I had asked Clarissa what I could help with. She had smiled and said, "Maybe learn to clean like your mother, sweetheart. It'll be useful one day." It was, just not in the way she expected. The turning point came 2 years ago when Clarissa's firm lost their distribution contract in 2 major regions. They didn't know who had bought it. They never bothered to trace the name behind the shell company. That was me. That was Veridine. And my mother? She was there beside me, every planning session, every number, every forecast. Now, she's my chief operating officer. But this meeting wasn't for business. Not really. It was for closure. Clarissa didn't know it yet, but she was here for the mop. The servants' wing didn't have heating. That winter, my mother wrapped my hands in kitchen towels before I walked to school, just so my fingers wouldn't crack open from the cold. We lived in a concrete extension behind the estate. It wasn't officially listed on the property documents. No one took photos of it. No one entered unless they were bringing deliveries too shameful for the front door. Clarissa called it the back utility suite. We called it home, because that's what you do when you have no choice. She liked to brag that she was letting us stay on site out of generosity, like we were charity cases instead of employees. And every time I passed her children's bedrooms, heated, carpeted, filled with trophies they never earned, I'd feel my mother's hand gently press against my back. "Head down, Celeste," she'd whisper. "Invisible is safe." I stayed invisible for 18 years, until one day I wasn't. Clarissa loved hosting parties, gala nights with fresh orchids and strings of imported lights. My mother would polish the silver, iron the napkins, prep the staff meals, and still serve dessert with a smile. She never let them see how tired she was, but I saw. At one party, I think I was 9, I overheard Clarissa telling a guest, "Oh, that one? She's just the maid's daughter. So sweet, follows her mother like a shadow." I stood behind the doorway holding a tray. The guest laughed politely. "Cute, like a little helper." Clarissa didn't correct her. She didn't say my name. She didn't even glance in my direction. That moment didn't break me. It branded me, because it taught me exactly how she saw us, temporary, voiceless, beneath notice. And if someone doesn't see you as real, they'll never see you coming. So I started watching, really watching. When I was 13, I stopped asking questions out loud. I watched where the invoices were stored. I watched how the delivery schedules were routed. I listened when her husband took calls about freight delays, taxes, labor costs. At 15, I started looking up the terminology in library books: logistics, procurement, supply chain optimization. I didn't tell my mother. Not then. She wouldn't have stopped me, but she would have worried. She would have tried to protect me from becoming too curious in a world that already kept us in our place. Clarissa's children never noticed me. They changed friends, hairstyles, boyfriends, but I was constant background noise. By the time I graduated, I had memorized the skeleton of their entire operation, and by the time I turned 21, I had registered a company under a different name, an old family name from my mother's side, Veridine. It meant nothing to Clarissa. It meant everything to me. I funded it by freelancing in the logistics backend for 3 boutique retailers. It wasn't glamorous, but it was precise. No PR, no show, just systems that worked better than hers. And when her company failed to deliver to the West Port during a strike, I made my first bid, anonymous, through layers of trust accounts and third-party brokers. She lost that contract. I gained my first $1 million. My mother still woke up at 5 a.m. every day, assuming she had to clean something, even after I brought her to the new Veridine office, even after I gave her a corner office and her own assistant. I watched her cry once, just once, when I handed her the title Chief Operating Officer. She said, "They'll never see me as anything but a maid." I said, "Then stop letting them look down." It took a while, but she stopped flinching when people called her ma'am. She started correcting them when they pronounced her last name wrong. Clarissa, meanwhile, was still showing up in magazines, posing with interns, claiming innovation she barely understood. And when her latest funding round collapsed, she reached out. Not to apologize, not to ask about my mother, but to collaborate. Her exact words were, "I hear you're doing impressive things with distribution. I think we'd make a great team, especially with our shared history." Shared history. She meant my mother's mop. She meant our childhood shame. She meant nothing, and she thought she still meant everything. So I said yes, let's meet. Let's talk logistics. I reserved the boardroom under her name. I placed the mop by the window, and I told the receptionist, "When she arrives, Don't correct her. Let her think I'm the guest. She always called me sweetheart. Never Celeste. Never Miss Rivas. When I was 6, it felt warm. At 10, I realized it wasn't meant for me. It was meant for keeping me small. Clarissa never learned my name because she never needed to. To her, I was background noise, the daughter of the woman who brought her lemon water and lint rolled her coats. And that invisibility? It gave me the most valuable thing a predator could ask for: freedom of movement. When I was 17, I shadowed her husband's operations team under the excuse of helping organize boxes. I wasn't touching boxes. I was watching how their supplier relationships worked, how payments were funneled, where the margins bled. They didn't even realize I'd set up a dummy logistics model on the side just to mirror their inefficiencies. I'd named the shell company Blue Bridge Logistics, a testing ground. It never went public, never got loud. But when a European client dropped their main distributor for late shipments, I was there. I undercut the price by 8%, promised real-time tracking, and delivered faster by using the exact routes her husband complained about at dinner. My client stayed. Bluebridge grew. Clarissa's grip slipped. But none of it mattered in her world, because to Clarissa I was just a girl who cleaned up nicely. When she walked into that boardroom last week, her eyes slid past me, again. She smiled like I was decoration. "Sweetheart, is the manager coming?" I didn't answer. I simply gestured to the seat across from me. She sat, crossed her legs, and started her pitch. Her voice dropped an octave when she spoke about expansion, as if lowering her tone gave her credibility. She cited long-standing legacy and strategic partnerships. She never once mentioned failure. I watched her try to sell me my own network. She wanted trucks I owned, routes I designed, systems I patented. She said, "We've always believed in empowering women from every background." I looked at the mop behind her and nearly laughed. "Empowerment? You left us without heat in December. You told the gardener not to speak to my mother because she didn't need distractions. You sent us Christmas leftovers in tinfoil with handwritten Post-its. Enjoy." My mother kept those notes in a box. Not out of sentiment, out of proof. When I turned 24, I hired a voice actor to call Clarissa's company as a potential investor. She bragged for 18 minutes straight. Not once did she mention my mother, but she did say, "We've raised women from all walks of life." Raised, like we were stray animals, like success was something she gifted, never something we took. Clarissa didn't build her empire, she married into it, and once her husband passed, she propped it up with borrowed charm and cut corners. What she didn't realize was that the people she once ignored, drivers, janitors, procurement interns, they were now mine. They answered to me, they delivered for me, and they believed in my mother more than they ever believed in her. Clarissa paused mid-sentence when she saw the nameplate beside me. Celeste Rivas, CEO, Veridine Logistics. The silence between us thickened. She blinked. Once, twice. Then she leaned back and gave a brittle laugh. "Oh, you're the one behind all that tech nonsense." I didn't flinch. "You know," she said, "you've done well, for someone from humble beginnings." That was her version of a compliment. I nodded. "For someone who watched quietly," I said, "I learned a lot." She caught the shift in tone. Her posture stiffened. She crossed her arms and said, "So what is this? A charity meeting?" "No," I said. "This is a courtesy." She blinked again. I leaned forward, folded my hands, and said clearly, "You came here thinking you'd be offered a partnership, that you'd get a seat at the table because of bloodlines and borrowed power." I glanced at the mop behind her. "That mop has seen more honest work than your entire career." Clarissa turned around slowly, her expression slipping. She recognized it. It was the same make, same brand, same grip tape her hand once shoved toward my mother. She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. I stood. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't gloat. I said, "That's your role now. If you still want to be part of this company." The mop clattered gently when I set it beside her chair. She didn't laugh this time. Clarissa didn't speak for 13 seconds. I know because I counted. She stared at the mop like it was radioactive. Like touching it might confirm the one thing she'd refused to believe her whole life, that the people she looked down on had never been beneath her. They were just quiet. And quiet was dangerous. I didn't wait for a reaction. I collected the papers in front of me, untouched contracts she wouldn't be signing, and slid them back into my briefcase. She finally said, "Is this a joke?" I looked at her evenly. "Number. This is your first honest job offer in 27 years. She scoffed. "You think this is power, humiliating me with a cleaning tool?" "No," I said. "The humiliation is assuming you still mattered." She opened her mouth again, and for a moment I saw the familiar engine revving in her brain. The charm she used at fundraisers, the fake warmth she deployed at investor mixers, the deflection she sharpened like cutlery. But none of it landed, because in that room on that day, Clarissa wasn't speaking to a servant's daughter. She was speaking to her replacement, and I had learned something crucial in all those years watching her. Real power doesn't announce itself. It signs payroll. It controls access. It owns the land under the house. That's what silence gave me. While she made noise, gala appearances, magazine covers, ribbon cuttings, I stayed quiet. I built slow, deliberately. And when I launched Veridine, I did it anonymously. 3 layers of holding companies, no PR, no LinkedIn, just execution. My first major deal came from a cold email. Not because I was persuasive, but because I had data. Perfect, unbroken data on delivery gaps Clarissa's firm couldn't patch. I didn't steal her clients. I stole the clients she didn't know she was losing, and every time someone asked about my background, I answered in clean, neutral terms. I come from operational experience, not poverty, not mops, just systems. Even when journalists began noticing our exponential growth, I deflected. I didn't give them the story. Because revenge that talks is revenge that leaks. I waited until the foundation was unshakable. Then I brought my mother in. At first, she refused. She said, "What do I know about running a company?" I said, "You managed a household of 24 entitled people for 3 decades. You balanced their chaos, managed their timing, corrected their messes, and kept their secrets. You were a COO before the word existed in your vocabulary." She cried, quietly. I gave her 2 weeks. She came back with a full operational audit and 3 vendor renegotiations that saved us $480,000 annually. The board asked me where I found her. I said, in a place no one ever looked. It wasn't just symbolic, it was practical. My mother didn't micromanage, she executed. And she didn't need to prove anything. Clarissa did. Clarissa always had. That's why when she started losing her grip on the market, she came looking. Not for me. She didn't even know I was the owner. She came for help, for leverage, for access to something that wasn't hers. That day in the boardroom, I let her talk. I gave her 15 uninterrupted minutes. She called me dear 6 times. She referenced my uphill climb like it was inspiring. Then she made her ask. "Would you be open," she said, "to me serving as an equity partner?" I think it would be a poetic full circle. Poetic. That's when I opened the side cabinet, removed the mop, and leaned it by her chair. Not a word. Just the weight of the past returned to its sender. I watched her throat tighten. She wasn't used to silence, she was used to applause, but this room had changed. She wasn't its center anymore. She said, "This is beneath you." I said, "It's exactly your level." And then I turned. She didn't follow, not immediately, because for the first time in her life she couldn't talk her way back to the top. She would have to climb, or clean. 2 days later, Clarissa sent an email. The subject line read, "Proposal revision, Clarissa M. Carrington." No apology, no acknowledgement, just an attached PDF titled Strategic Partnership Draft V2. She had added a clause offering to personally oversee client-facing operations in exchange for 12% equity. She cited her network and legacy sectors, her decades of brand equity, and her visionary leadership in emerging markets. What she didn't mention, again, was failure. Her firm had lost 3 regional contracts in 6 months. 2 key investors had walked after discovering a falsified shipping log, and her COO, her own daughter, had jumped ship to a rival 2 weeks before our meeting. I didn't reply to the email. I forwarded it to my board, along with my annotated version. Each comment was concise. Number, inflated value. Redundant. False claim, she was not involved in port automation project. Legacy equity equals liability, see lines 14 to 28. My mother was copied on the thread. She responded with 3 lines. Conflict of interest potential too high, reputational risk if she's listed, recommend rejection. We put it to a vote, 7 members, 0 in favor. I scheduled the follow-up meeting myself. Boardroom, Thursday, 11 a.m. Clarissa arrived in white. She always wore white to deals, believing it gave her the aura of control. It didn't work here. She stepped inside to find the full board present. No coffee, no handshake, just folders, 1 per seat. She hesitated. I gestured to the chair at the far end, opposite mine. She sat, smiled, waited for someone else to speak first. I let the silence hold. Then I said, "Before we review your revised offer, I'd like to reintroduce someone." My mother stepped into the room. Black blouse, simple watch, hair pulled back, calm. Clarissa's smile faltered. I continued, "Most of you know Ms. Lena Rivas as our COO. What you may not know is that Ms. Carrington once employed her. For 30 years, without promotion, without recognition, without even a nameplate." Clarissa's knuckles whitened against the table. I said, "Today, she co-manages a portfolio valued at just over $210 million, and today she will explain why we're not moving forward." My mother's voice was quiet, not cold, not cruel, just factual. She listed every financial risk, the PR blowback from associating with Clarissa's firm, the history of unpaid invoices, the lawsuits pending in 3 states. She ended with, "And finally, I don't believe Ms. Carrington understands the difference between being present and being responsible." The room held still. Clarissa tried to interrupt. "I think we're conflating personal history with professional value." I raised one hand, palm down. "Stop. This is a vote-only meeting," I said. "No debate, no narrative, just record and result." 7 hands rose, one by one, all against. Clarissa looked at me then, not as a niece, not as the maid's daughter, but as something far worse to her, an equal who didn't need her. I didn't smile, didn't gloat. I simply stood. "I'll have security escort you to your car. Your badge access will be revoked by noon." She opened her mouth. I didn't wait to hear it. I turned, nodded to the board, and left the room first. My mother stayed. When she came out 10 minutes later, she was holding the mop, the same one, cleaned, polished, wrapped in ribbon. "She said she didn't want it," my mother told me, But I told her it was the only thing she ever truly earned. It sat on the glass display shelf in our new office lobby for 3 days. The mop, not hidden, not shamed, not tucked away like a memory we didn't want. It was framed in a shadow box, mounted on brushed steel with a small plaque beneath it. Used. Underestimated. Returned with interest. Rivas Holdings. Founders Collection. Most visitors didn't ask about it. Some assumed it was an art piece. One investor laughed, thinking it was a metaphor. It wasn't. It was a receipt, a timestamp, proof that legacy wasn't always inherited. It was often rebuilt from scraps. Clarissa never responded after the vote. She didn't call, didn't show up again, but I knew she saw the press release. We didn't mention her name. We didn't need to. The headlines were enough. Veridine COO announces 20-year expansion plan. Mother-daughter team poised to redefine distribution industry. From servants' quarters to C-suite, quiet logistics, giant reveals, family roots. Industry shakeup, old money firms losing ground to stealth innovators. No one asked about Clarissa, but everyone knew who we meant. 3 weeks later, she showed up at a regional summit. Smaller event, less press. She wore navy this time. No white, no headlines. I watched from the balcony as she introduced herself to junior reps, pitching herself as an advisor with deep market insights. No one recognized her. At one point, she walked past the Veridine booth, quietly. She saw my mother's name on the board, stopped, stared, then turned without a word. That was the real mop moment. Because humiliation isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just recognition, delayed, unavoidable. We never heard from her again. But her absence did something better than her presence ever could. It cleared the air. Our staff no longer whispered when her name came up. Vendors stopped referencing legacy clients. Our office culture shifted. Because we didn't just build a company, we reclaimed a history. The mop stayed on display, not to remind us of her, but to remind us of who we were when no one was looking. My mother started bringing it up in new hire orientation. She'd walk past it with a slight nod and say, "You want to talk about work ethic? That mop's older than this building." People laughed. But the message landed. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about record. That's the thing about people like Clarissa. They rely on forgetting how they spoke to you, what they said behind doors, who they stepped on to reach the microphone. But we didn't forget. We documented. And every inch of that documentation, silent, precise, unreactive, became leverage. That's what real revenge is. Not a slap, not a scream. It's structure, it's scale, it's standing in the room they tried to lock you out of, holding the key and the deed and the memory. I pass the mop every morning now. I didn't flinch, I didn't smile, I just nodded back at it. The gala was smaller than I expected. 70 guests, black tie, soft jazz. It wasn't the kind of event Clarissa would have approved of. No photographers, no wine sponsors, no hollow awards. Just one glass podium and a simple slide, 20 years, from deliveries to decisions. I stood off stage, watching my mother adjust the mic. Her notes were folded in her palm, untouched. She never needed prompts. She spoke plainly, not as a COO, not as a symbol, just as a woman who had cleaned behind others for decades, and now stood in front of them. "I used to think silence was safety," she said, "but silence without memory is just erasure, and memory without proof is just pain." She looked toward the mop, mounted beside the podium. "I kept this for years, not because I liked it, because I needed to remember what people thought I was worth, so that one day I'd know exactly when to stop accepting that valuation." The room didn't clap. Not yet, because they were still absorbing it, the weight of lineage without apology. When she stepped down, I met her at the bottom of the stage. "You ready?" I asked. She smiled. "Only took 30 years." We walked together to the side corridor where a document sat on a velvet-draped table. The final paperwork. Transfer of property. Riva's Holdings had just acquired 100% of the Carrington estate, not for residency, for demolition. The land would be used to build a modular logistics academy, fully staffed, fully funded, tuition-free for first-gen entrepreneurs, and named after her. She signed first, then handed me the pen. I hesitated only for a moment. There was no satisfaction in watching Clarissa lose her grip. That already happened, quietly, years ago. This wasn't about her anymore. It was about the mop, the cold, the closet where I did homework on an upside-down bucket. It was about the noise we didn't make back then because we were too busy surviving. I signed. One final stroke. She turned to me and said, "You know she'll hear about this." "I know." "Do you want her to?" "No." "Will you still send the press release?" "Yes." We didn't need revenge headlines. We didn't need her name. All we needed was documentation, land titles, leadership charts, a new building where no one would ever be addressed as just the maid's daughter again. We left the gala together. No speeches, no interviews, just our names printed in full, side by side on every document that mattered. The legacy we built wasn't loud. It didn't scream. It didn't spike in stock price. But it would last longer than her empire, because it was written in systems and signed in both ink and salt.